So, is there a crisis in capitalism, do you think, at the moment?
I mean, of course, the frustrating thing is that despite this being the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression, despite literally tens of millions of people being thrown out of work and many millions of people in developing countries sinking below the poverty line, the changes that are made to the system are very, very slow, if at all. And I don't know, I mean, you talked about in your book, Wobbs, that we all, of course, that individually have to bear responsibility for what has happened. But on the other hand, people feel very angry by the fact that especially those who have had to bear greater responsibilities for this, financiers, economists, and so on, seem to be bearing least of the burden.
And it hasn't translated over to politics much. I mean, one of the things I know, reading the Chinese newspapers, they do this very funny thing. They always, without exception, talk about the Western financial crisis.
Yes,
they never say the financial,
right,
always the Western. But it's curious here that, I was at a talk the other day and was talking, it was a point that you make in your book and elsewhere, that there are lots of different capitalisms. It's not one system, it's a plurality of systems. And someone stuck up a hand and said, yes, but aren't they all basically going to converge on the model we have here? And they aren't going to gradually and it was a really striking thing. It was only afterwards that the obvious answer occurred to me, which was that, well, actually, they're doing better. All these other models are doing better. But it's very odd, isn't it, that fact is so underappreciated in the Anglo-American world, that somehow we regard our model as a sort of purer and somehow natural state of capitalism, and these ones that have more socialised models, more role for the state, more rules about the markets, are somehow less authentic.
Let's try a more adulterated version of the real thing.
And therefore they ought to be more like us, even though we're failing and they're succeeding.
That's right, yeah. No, but I think there is one reason why, I mean, at least for a while, people thought there will be convergence, because the Anglo-American finance capitalism, that really benefits people at the very top. And the elite in other countries became all envious. So if you meet some sections of German elite or Japanese elite, Korean elite, they are dying to have American capitalism. They want their own.
They really want the system where the 1% gets everything, because that would suit them very nicely.
Of course, in these other countries, there have been various historical and political reasons why they couldn't do that. But then, some of these people became even more American than the Americans, so to speak, and wanted to dismantle everything, go back to the, if you like, state of nature, where the winner takes all and don't have to kind of pay taxes and things like that.
In comparison to actually existing models, because we don't have to say there's some hypothetical science fiction world in which you do things differently, it works out better. We can actually point to those countries that have different models.
I mean, the supporters of this free market capitalism tend to kind of criticize the welfare state, but then how do they explain the fact that despite having welfare state as a proportion of national income, more than twice bigger than that of the American one, countries like Sweden and Finland in the last 50 years have grown much faster than the United States. So, a lot of this
is to explain away.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of this is based on concealment of certain inconvenient information and repeating the same line again and again, that this is the only thing that works, this is the purest form. And unfortunately, this publicity campaign has been quite effective. Modern economics, well, not all of it, but large chunk of it, has become basically the factory for manufacturing ideology that justifies status quo. And also, a lot of economists have become very technical. So, I mean, I sometimes half-jokingly liken the profession to a building project which has been taken over by plumbers. So, you know, I mean, why don't we have 7 bathrooms? You know, you can always crash on the bathroom floor. Why do you need a kitchen? Why do you need 3 bedrooms? You know, have this ideology that justifies what is going on at the moment, advocating what people with power and money have done. It's very difficult to unseat this ideology because there's so much at stake. The defenders of this ideology will do everything to stop it being from discredited.
And do you see that coming up in the political conversation much? People coming up with real challenges to it?
Well, unfortunately, not as much as we had thought it might be.
That's I think too, and it's a pretty amazing absence given the, you know, provable extent of the failure and the difficulties we're in.
Exactly, yeah.
And it proves which stresses a point that I think that people don't sufficiently appreciate, which is that you know, we're very preoccupied by terrorism and the war on terror, and we're told that terrorism poses an existential threat, which it doesn't, and historically it never has. No democratic state has ever been endangered by terrorism. People get killed and it's terrible, but the actual fundamental basis of democracy has never threatened. But the financial system and the problems in the financial sector are genuine existential threats to democracy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not least because if the cash points stop working, you know, it's really not clear what happens in a developed economy very, very quickly. That's and if you have that big a gap between the people and, you know, their governments who are effectively appointed by European Council, you know, democracy has really been attenuated.
Yeah. No, I mean, there are different things that you have to do. I mean, you basically have to reform the financial system. You have to make sure that, you know, that this doesn't turn into, I mean, as once the American writer Go Vidal called the American economic system socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor.
But that's supposed to be a joke. But at the moment, that's actually the system. Is there a sense in which, you know, the bad guys won in 2008? I mean, after the bailout. I mean, that's, I think, for me, certainly that's the sort of simplest way, and it glosses various things over, but almost the simplest way of explaining what happened is that we had this moment of crisis, the financial system got the capital injection it needed, paid for by us, and then they won. They you know, got to the resumption of the status quo ante, and to carry on as if it was before, and you know, party like it's 2006.
That's right, yeah.
And none of the reforms actually happened, and so we're basically back to where we were.
In the end, we will make the changes, but I mean, it's very frustrating that you know, we, as some people put it, wasted this crisis. I mean, that was the moment when we could reform our economies for the new century, and the shift in global economic balance of power and so on, and the opportunity, at least until now, has been squandered. And I mean, that's the sad thing, but I don't think that necessarily makes us totally pessimistic, because, you know, at least compared to, say, 2006 and 2007, there's a lot more awareness about the rising inequality. There's a lot more concern about the even cultural gap that is growing between the super rich and the rest of the population. And there's now a lot of worries about youth unemployment. You know, even George Osborne's talking about, you know, reviving the manufacturing sector and so on. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but painfully slowly. And of course, there's no guarantee that this will lead to anything good in the immediate future.
But we're starting to ask the right questions anyway.
Oh yeah, the fact that the top 1% in the United States used to take, say, 10% of national income at the end of 1970s, and were taking more than 25% of it by the middle years of the 2000s.
Yeah.
This fact was completely unknown outside the small circle of radical economists, you know. So these are now common knowledge, and at least acknowledging that there is a problem and acknowledging that these are the sources of problem, I think that is the starting point for making things better.
Yeah, but it's still the case that the politicians are more frightened of the financial system than they are of their own electorates.
Unfortunately,
and until that changes, I think it's hard to.
Yeah, but ultimately, why do we want democracy? You know, it's because it gives people to force politicians to do things that they would otherwise not do.
Wouldn't do. Yes.
So I mean, I like to think that democracy is where our ultimate hope lies, because without that system, of course, politicians wouldn't do anything to offend these people with a lot of money and power.
Yeah, don't frighten the horses.
That was a collective sleepwalk into disaster.
Yeah.
And in order to prevent that, we need to make the system simpler and reduce the unnecessary amount of complexity. Otherwise, we'll see this kind of disaster again. You know, the usual refrain from free market economies is that markets learn, and now no one's trading in CDSs and CDOs and so on. But yes, I mean probably they don't do that anymore. But they'll invent other things. Yeah, and it's like someone saying that my drug killed 20 million people, but now we know that it's not safe. So let's pretend that this is okay. That's right.